Good morning. So this is a deep dive into the Ietf in 7 minutes. That worked. Okay, getting right into it. This is the mission statement for the Ietf, and as has been pointed out before, the main goal is to make the internet work better. But what does that mean? And the answer is, it's the users. Come on, come on. There we go. Yes, at its core, the Ietf covers everything to do with the middle layers, if you will, having to do with the network and transporting bits. But it also concerns itself with everything around that, as Bob was saying. Things that it runs over and things that run over it. For example, we don't do HTML or XML or any of those, but we do HTTP in concert with W3C. We work very closely with them. So the problems of RDA, and by the way, as an aside, I really hope that very soon you make an important decision, which is whether you're RDA or the RDA. It'll make making slides a lot easier. So the problems of RDA are very relevant to us. If there's something you need from this section, transporting the bits, just let us know. It takes 2 pushes every time. Come on. You know what? This is a previous version of my slides, but that's all right. I'll make it up as I go. Okay. So essentially, this is what I just said, that there are ways in which we can interact. You could produce your own communication standards, which I doubt, can bring in informational documents, or you can use registries. For example, to have type codes, an index for various metadata schemas, things like that. I'm going to skip over this and I'm going to see what happens. Okay, Ietf culture in a nutshell. Number 1, we are adamant that we have no membership, only participants. People can show up for one meeting or send one email, and if what they say is technically valid, even if they never come back, it's accepted and it's significant. And you don't represent anybody except yourself. Working groups are hard to form. Once they're formed, they have a lot of power. Rough consensus and running code is a great soundbite that I don't think I should take the time to go into. And the final authoritative decisions are made on the mailing list, not in the in-person meetings. We try hard to make it possible for people to contribute, even if they can never show up at one of the meetings. It's a very populist organization. Leaders are selected from the ground up. Once they're selected, we give them a lot of influence, but at the same time, there's tremendous checks and balances. We don't trust anybody, and we argue a lot. The gist of the Ietf structure is the working groups mainly produce most of the documents. They get filtered up through the steering group, which is area directors. I guess that's on the next slide. I sure hope so. And then they end up as documents known as RFCs, requests for comments. There are other ways to do that. There are, you can bring in individual contributions. I'll get to that on the next slide, I hope. We'll find out. And we have other components as well. We have the steering group, we have the Internet Architecture Board, the Internet Administrative Oversight Committee. I left out the Internet Research Task Force, which is a parallel organization. There is other structure that's optional. For example, within an area, you can have directorates that are advisory. You can have more than one. They're ad hoc, they come and go. Within a working group, you can have secretaries, ombudsmen, et cetera. None of that is required, none of that is formalized. There's guidance, but it's pretty ad hoc. Okay, so, yep, that works. So basically, a document comes in either from an individual or an organization like the ODA, or from a working group. It goes through 2 to 4 weeks of review by the entire community, and there's always something that somebody is saying. It goes through the steering group, which is made up of the area directors. Assuming you get through this cycle, eventually you pop out, and from there, it's easy. And you have a standard, or a document anyway. There's one slide missing, which was about scale. How do we pull this off? We produced 330-something documents last year, and we have over 120 working groups. There are three things. These are my personal opinions. First of all, really good leadership. We take months selecting the leadership, and we're very fortunate to have a group of people who are really sincere, idealistic, and they have lots of time. Another is really good tools. We have a lot of people like to program. So we produce really good tools to make the workflow go very well, all aspects of it. And there was another point which I don't remember at this time. So, are we useful? Yes, I think so. At least look at us to learn from our mistakes. If you want to use an Ietf protocol for something, for example, carrying an index, something like that, I really recommend that you also put in a document describing that so that you have the use of the Ietf protocol and documentation about that use all in one bundle, even if registries and everything else are maintained completely elsewhere. What else? I don't know. Whatever you say, and we should have a conversation about that. And we really do like to help out organizations that use our products. So thank you.
Any questions? A couple questions for Scott. Right here, he's got one in front.
Kevin Ashley, Digital Curation Center. Scott, you said we should learn from your mistakes as well as copying the things that work well. I wonder if you could help us in that process by describing at least one of the mistakes, one of the things that in retrospect you would have done differently. Any warnings for us?
You want to talk about Kobe?
I'd be happy to, but it's your
No, I'm trying to think if that was a mistake. It's turned out.
Can I just say, Scott, I think the main thing you want to focus on are the growing pains of the Ietf over time.
Yeah.
Because I think any organization that is as successful and impactful is going to experience the same kind of things, and the growing pain, managing the growing pains was, in my view, the most important thing.
And we are, I don't know, there's some psychological trait. We complain about ourselves and our processes all the time. Like the subject yesterday was badges and how useless they are, and why do we bother? And well, we could do all sorts of cool technical things with it and so on, so we're always tweaking that. I'd say one mistake that comes to mind right now is insisting on plain text for the documents. It's a real pain. You can't integrate, ASCII art has become a real skill, and we can do better than that.
One more there.
So, this is not an argument, but why might we want to, what are the characteristics of Ietf that we might want to model RDA after, as opposed to, for example, W3C, which some of us are also active in?
No, I'd really like to leave that up to you. I don't know RDA's culture well enough to answer that, how it's going to work. For example, as I said, we pick our leaders carefully and give them a lot of authority. Like rough consensus assumes that the chair of the group isn't a ethical person, because you can get away with a lot if you declare rough consensus. You don't have voting, etc. We can talk more about this later, but that's one example of something to pursue. Some of the checks and balances are very interesting, like the nominating committee will choose leadership here, but it needs to be confirmed by these people, and then there can still be a groundswell of disagreement to take them out. Things like that, just mechanisms that might be useful.
Okay, one more, Bruce.
Scott, you I think, provide a really nice description of how it is that a document is generated and the role of rough consensus in that. But there's another half of the equation. Once a document has been generated, its real value lies in the degree to which it's adopted and used more broadly. How is it that Ietf has been successful in getting RFCs to be adopted quite broadly? What's the leverage there?
Desperate need. We need the internet to work. So we bring people together. We do not produce standards, right? We are not a standards organization. We have no membership. But everybody gets together and says, this is a good way to do it, and we all agree we're going to do it this way, and then they adopt it. Now, there's a lot of politics around that, I will admit. For example, some companies will come in and will insist that the agreement be bare bones, lowest common denominator, and then they'll add features as special value add for them. But desperate need is basically the answer. We don't need to sell it to anyone. People come because they have to have something that works for interoperability.
Yeah, I just want to make one comment since we've been involved in both creating the Ietf and its secretariat over many years. I think the most interesting aspect about its history is not what's apparent to everybody, namely what it does and why it does it well and what it can do in the future, but how it got to be what it is today. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't created in whole cloth exactly as Scott just described it. In fact, it's a product of the need of the social processes to evolve with time. So when the need for something like that showed up, it was a concern that I had, and we were managing this out of an office that I was running, that if something happened to me or the person who I put in charge of running it at that point, whose name was Vincent, something happened to us, who would know what was going on, what we were doing? So we set up a kitchen cabinet of some sorts. I think we call it Internet Configuration Control Board. Yep. It had no authority whatsoever. We picked a guy in the community, Dave Clark from MIT, to go run it, and that ran for a while. And this became such an interesting, I mean, why are you all here at the RDA? It's just something to contribute, you're really interested in the topic. People would show up at meetings of this ICCB because they were intensely interested in understanding what was going on and how the net was evolving. So what started out as a group of about 12 people, chaired by Dave Clark, with oversight, in this case from DARPA, ended up growing. And by 4 or 5 years later, when Vint left and I took it back over again to run, to have a meeting with these 12 people, you had an auditorium of at least this size, and you had to figure out how to coordinate 300 strap hangers, I would say. Not that anybody in this audience is a strap hanger, but we had a lot of people who just wanted to hear what was going on. So, and I ran it for a while, and I brought in a fellow named Barry Liner to then take over so I could get out of doing that. And he said, I don't want to have to invite 300 people. So he created, along with Dave Clark, something called the Internet Activities Board, IAB, which has the same name as the Internet Architecture Board, but for legal reasons it was changed. And so the IAB then took over the responsibility, and Barry decentralized it all. He said, look, we're not going to try and describe it from the government anymore. You figure out what to do. We'll be kind of the backstop oversight group. We'll provide the funding, but the locus is on your side. That was pretty traumatic, because now suddenly people who felt like they weren't empowered before were suddenly empowered. And now this meeting of 300 broke into, I think it was 10 working groups initially, and everyone had a specific charter. It was on routing or autonomous systems or end-to-end protocols or security, whatever. And one of them was called Internet Engineering. This was the group that kept the punch list for the internet as it was kind of growing up. Punch lists, for those of you who don't know that term, is so if you buy a house, it's 100 things that need to be fixed before you're willing to take title. The door that doesn't quite open and close properly, the drip in the faucet, the crack in the ceiling. So these were the cracks in the protocols and the protocol things that got stuck and so forth. And so Internet Engineering Working Group was responsible for the punch list. In a very few years, that punch list was all checked out. So we could have just folded that engineering group, but at this point, the number of working groups had gone from 10 to probably 50. And the IAB was finding it too big a burden to manage all of this. So they said to this other group, instead of going out of business, why don't you take on the job of managing these other working groups? And so that was born the IETF as you now know it. Except the IETF as you now know it reported to the IAB. So they had to approve the charters, and they weren't really a self-sufficient group, but it continued in that mode until roughly 1992, when there was a major upheaval. I would say nuclear upheaval in Kobe, Japan, at a meeting when the IAB made a decision to adopt a protocol that I guess had been incubated. Was it in the ITU? And the problem was they hadn't coordinated it with the folks in the IETF. Well, you had 12 people on the IAB, and you had, 1,000 or more in the IETF who were really doing the work. These were the worker bees. And the question was, what the heck are you doing? You're trying to make these unilateral decisions on something we didn't do without even asking us. We don't want anything to do with you, was sort of the sense. And there was about to become a major schism, major split. We're going to go our own way was sort of the thinking. And it was a better part of a year or two of hardcore politicking to try and stitch this broken fabric of social bonding back together again. And it finally happened for good reason, but as part of the process, some more covenants were agreed to. Then instead of the IAB being the body that decided on the standards, they said, okay, you, the IETF, can do that, and we'll just sort of be the oversight group. So the locus of responsibility shifted as part of that. And that's where the IESG came out of, and a lot of the responsibility itself. And eventually, when we also created something called the Internet Society, and then there was a question of how much of this is appropriate. Would the IAB be part of the Internet Society? They finally decided to, but the IETF didn't want to go, and so what was that relationship? And then there was this flipping around of the IAB as the oversight body for the IETF, where the IAB started to talk about the fact that they were part of the IETF. It's almost like they kind of decided the IETF was the larger umbrella and they were just a part of it, even though they had this oversight role. So every growth spasm, and I guess maybe they're a 10-year growth spasm, ends up with these issues that are issues of who's in charge, who's in control, what kind of shifts need to be made. And the fact that that was managed so well, I think, is the way I would put it over time, is why the IETF is the way it is today. It's still a very powerful force. It's the best venue for, evolving the internet that we've had so far, and I hope it continues that way.